So we have our top 1% now reaching the highest rates, maybe 22, 23% of total household income earned by the top 1% of the income distribution. One of the aspects of this that turns out to be related is not only has the income gap between rich and poor widened, but the probability of going from a lower percentile to a higher percentile has declined dramatically. So America has also become not only unequal, but socially immobile. If you're born into a poor family, you should expect to be poor. That's a drama, also because our self-image was the land of opportunity. So what we see is all through the high-income world, the narrower the income distribution, the higher the intergenerational mobility. The wider the income inequality, the lower the social mobility. So the U.S. has become unequal and also tracked, socially immobile. That's another part of the politics. One of the stunning features of this is we have a social crisis that is now manifesting itself in a mortality crisis. That's a very dramatic sign. That's like Russia in the 1990s, where middle-aged men died in epidemic proportions. Life expectancy fell sharply, mainly due to alcoholism, liver disease, suicide, accidents, and homicides. So in the U.S., we're experiencing the same phenomena, not as sharp as Russia did in the 1990s, but similar. We're experiencing a true social crisis among the white working class population. And what's shown here is, for example, this is mortality due to drugs, alcohol, and suicide of men and women between the age of 50 and 54, and the red upper curve is U.S. white population, so it's taking away the minority issues. And you see it's soaring. And this is true across many phenomena. This graph is quite interesting, a little bit busy and hard to understand, but I'll go to the last three bars. This is the change of mortality between 1999 and 2015, age-specific mortality rates for white, non-Hispanic, middle-aged Americans, okay, age 50 to 54. Three bars that you see there. High school, some college, and a bachelor's degree. So if you have a bachelor's degree, the mortality rate went down. That's the last bar in this slide. If you have a high school or some college as maximum education attainment, the mortality rate's actually rising. So not only is the income gap widening, but the mortality gap is widening also. That's social crisis. And not only is the gap widening in relative terms, for the first time in a century, the absolute mortality rates are rising for high school educated white Americans, Trump voters. They're sending a message. They're sick of the establishment. Their lives are not what they imagined they should be. Of course, Trump has nothing to do with solutions for them, but he was able to get their vote. And that's what populism is. So we also see many signs of absolute decline of well-being expressed in other ways. I edit each year a report called the World Happiness Report, which analyzes data from Gallup International surveys, where people are asked, how's your life? By asking people to rate their lives on a scale from 0 to 10. It's called the Cantril ladder. People are told imagine your life is like a ladder, or life is like a ladder. And there are 10 rungs on the ladder, and the bottom rung is the worst life you can imagine, and the 10th rung is the best life you can imagine. What rung are you standing on? And the average, more or less, for the rich countries is the 7th rung. For the top-rated countries, maybe between 7 and 8. This is the answer of U.S. respondents to the surveys from 2006 to 2015. That is just one unhappy country where our ratings went from about third among the rich countries to third among 23 high-income countries surveyed in 2006 to 21st out of 34 countries surveyed in 2016. And that's really that social crisis again. We also see, as another part of this phenomenon, declining social trust. This is a standard question in sociological research. Can you trust most people? And the proportion that say yes has been declining over time. And then another question, can you trust the government? This is in complete free fall. Not only related to economics, it goes back actually to the Kennedy assassination, Vietnam, Watergate. The US government's given us lots of reason for distrust over the years. But it has continued to decline to a point of basically the kind of political crisis that we experience now. So the result is populism. And I would say that Brexit, the Austrian election, the Trump election, it's almost the same sociology. Of course, the underlying conditions are very wide or more narrow, but there's a lot of similarity. Our societies are divided, almost 50-50, if it's a two-person race. And in all of these elections, as I understand it, I don't understand Austrian sociology and electoral sociology so well, but my perception is that it's the same, that high school educated have tended to vote for populism and the right and the anti-migrant right, and college educated and above have tended to vote for the left and with a completely different attitude. And my point is this is both economically class-based, it's real life experience, and it is a reflection also of the changing demography. So this is from the exit polls from Brexit, a line showing that the more educated, the higher the educational attainment, the higher the vote for Remain in Europe. It's a very strong relationship. This is across counties, a cross-section of counties in the UK vote. This is I didn't label it well, but these are 50 states scattered in the US. And what is on the horizontal axis is the percent of the adult population in one of the states that has a bachelor's degree. And on the vertical axis is the share of the state vote that went to Donald Trump. So what you see here is something quite strong, actually, and I think causal, not spurious. And that is that states that have a high level of education are doing better economically, are more dynamic, have more job creation, and so forth. And they voted anti-Trump. Those are the states down in the lower right-hand corner. And the states in the upper left-hand corner have a low overall college-going population, and they voted overwhelmingly for Trump. This is the biggest single divide. If you rank states by the percent with college degree, it's quite interesting. Of the top rank states from highest degree, highest proportion to the lowest. Of the top 19 states, Hillary Clinton won 18 of them. Of the bottom 31 states, Donald Trump won 29 of them. So it's almost the complete separation. And education is our divide, because education is probably a divide of mentalite to some extent, but it's also a divide of market income and life experience and public health, all of it. If you are well educated in the United States, life has never been better. If you are in Manhattan where we live, the restaurants are packed. And the higher price the restaurant, the more packed they are. There's no sign at all of any economic crisis that way. If you take the train along the Northeast Corridor and go through some of the old factory towns, they're boarded up. Those jobs are gone. They're automated or they're offshored. And so this divide is in front of one's eyes if one cares to look. And it is our political divide, absolutely. And this is from the Austrian presidential election survey results. Basically, Hofer got 86% of the blue-collar vote according to this decomposition. I can't vouch for it, but it was the main one that I was able to find, whereas von der Bellen, of course, won with the higher education or more skilled parts of the labor force. So I think we're seeing this division basically everywhere, and it's a little simplistic, but it's actually a pretty sharp differentiation. So let me finally turn to solutions, because this is a dangerous world. And I should say a word about what Trump actually said, because the populism, of course, is a kind of false populism. He's a sleaze, and all his friends are, not all his friends are sleazes. It seems that all of his small set of friends are billionaires, and most of them are sleazes, I think. I don't know if that's absolutely true, but it looks like it. So he has his populism is a completely phony populism. But it's in one sense, a standard kind of populism. And that is he's blaming foreigners. There's no class politics at all with Trump. The opposite. What he's telling poor people is not rich people took everything, that they have a great life. That's the true message. That's what Bernie Sanders was telling people. And it almost won the Democratic Party nomination. But what Trump is telling them is the Mexicans took away your job, the Chinese cheated you, the Muslims cheated you, and that's the real point of why this is so dangerous. Of course, it's all a show also, so which I don't know, we don't know how to think about that because this guy's attention span is really clinically low. And his knowledge base is very low. So we don't really know what this means, except that the reason that he was able to appeal to these lower class workers was that he made an appeal, a populist appeal. I feel your pain. She's been part of the establishment. She did this, her husband did this, and there was a lot of truth to that message, by the way. So the message stuck because he was an outsider and she was an insider, and because Clinton Democratic Party was not social democracy, Clinton Democratic Party was center-right at best. It was kind of Blairist labor, which is not labor. It's something, but it's not anything that can answer this kind of political situation. But Trump's message is extremely dangerous because it's racist, because it's phony, and worst of all, its messages that are politically false are terrifying because they can't work. So it's not as if he's giving an answer to an underemployed or unemployed worker in Detroit. He has no answer at all. And that means you can imagine his popularity rating has come down. That's a tribute to the American people, or it's low at around, last time I looked, around 36% approval and almost 60% disapproval. But it also means, and I don't mean to be completely gloomy about this, that it's just the kind of thing that a good little war could boost. And that's really the terrifying part of this. He can't do too much politically inside the U.S., even all those executive orders that he's flamboyantly signing, almost none of them is self-acting. Almost none of them means anything other than, look, I really want to wreck the environment, thank you. But it doesn't mean he can do that, because if you look at the actual statements, it's I intend to do the following, most of which he would not be able to do. But the one thing that he would be able to do, unfortunately, is go to war, because we don't have constraints. Congress is uninterested in that part of the business. It's all left to the president these days, and that is a very dangerous reality. I'll say one final word, especially being in Bruno Kreisky's house. I'm a believer that deep answers to this are both economic and cultural and moral, and that the economic side remains with social democracy as being the best idea we have. Social democracy basically means you let markets function, and then you redistribute income, and you ensure universal decency, dignity, and access to quality services, and you protect the environment. So it's, to my mind, a very successful philosophy and politics, and it is based on the idea of collecting a lot of taxes and spending a lot in the public sector. And to my mind, it's been the most successful political, socio-political, socioeconomic political system of the last century. And we should be trying to renovate it and trying to make it work under changing circumstances in the 21st century. I did the following graph, this is not surprising in this context, but you can measure income inequality two ways. You can measure income inequality as what you earn on the marketplace, or you can measure income inequality after you pay your taxes and after you receive the benefits from the government. So one is called the market income, the other is the disposable income. The disposable income is always more equal than the market income in every country, because rich do pay more in taxes and the poor get more in benefits, and there's some narrowing of the income gap. What social democracy is characterized by is a big narrowing. So Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Austria, Germany, Netherlands have a lot of market income inequality, but after it goes through the fiscal filter, it's narrowed quite dramatically. And what I show you here is the following calculation. You can take a measure of income inequality of the market and a measure of the income inequality of disposable income. And the measure that economists use is called the Gini coefficient. And it's a measure between 0, which is complete equality, and 1, which is one person owns everything and everyone else has nothing. So societies are between 0 and 1. You can ask, how much does the fiscal system reduce the gaps? In other words, you take the Gini coefficient of the market inequality, the Gini coefficient of the disposable income, which is lesser, you get a difference, and then you can make a calculation. And what's shown here is that depending on how much government spends on social policy, either there's very little decline or there's a very big drop of inequality. And so the countries at the end of the chart there are the ones with high social spending. Austria is there, Germany, Sweden, Italy, Denmark, France. And the countries near the top, Korea, Chile, Turkey, and the U.S. is about right here. And what you can see is that's social democracy in action, which is spend more on the social policy, you dramatically reduce the gaps of income inequality. And especially at a time when market forces are leading to this widening of income inequality and are likely to continue to do so, this is a fundamental point. Last point I want to make is a question, and that is, can a 21st century kind of social democracy that is updated for a quite different economic structure, for robotics, for artificial intelligence, and so forth, continue to do the job? Every year I publish 2 different rankings. One is on sustainable development and one is on happiness. And it is notable that the most happy countries and the most sustainably developed economies are the same, Scandinavia. So the very top of the list in this year's ranking was Norway, Denmark, Iceland. Okay? The Nordic, Scandinavian, the Nordic countries. In sustainable development readiness, the top of the list was Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Finland. You get the drift. They're the ones that have spent the most in fiscal policy. They have the most equalization of incomes, and so on. I also, as I mentioned, published the happiness report. So happiness and sustainable development, both of them show up at the top. Empirically, that's about the best you can do right now. If you ask who are the best performers, who is most sustainably developed, who's most green and prosperous at the same time, who reports the highest level of happiness? Austria does pretty well, by the way. Not bad. Austria comes out 7th on the Sustainable Development Index. My country, 25th. The reason the U.S. comes down so low is that we have such huge inequality, and we're dirty. We're really polluting. And Donald Trump's great dream is to make us as dirty as possible, as fast as possible, because some of his billionaire friends are in the oil, coal, and gas sector. And it's just a game for them. Climate change, what do they care? That's really the attitude. It's not that they're deniers, by the way. It's they could care less. They don't know anything about science, but they don't care at all. It's not doubts. It's not denial. It's a game. It's just the financial interests. So we rank quite low on the list. Austria, not as happy. Ranking number 13th on the list. On average, over the last 3 years, the U.S. was 14, but as I told you, in the one recent year, it fell to 21st. So we're really on the way down. I hope Austria is on the way up. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for this great lecture. To your last point, I have to disappoint you. We will never be higher on the happiness index because there is a cultural, traditional mentality in Austria, so and we cannot be associated with happiness. We can only be associated with bad mood. We'll not call it grantic, but you should not take it too serious. It's national culture and not a question of economics in that point. I thank you also for all these compliments to Austria, also for the compliment that we did a little bit better in the presidential election than the US. We have also a friend of us here, the deputy party leader of the presidential party, and the deputy governor of Tyrol.
Oh, great.
I have to say that because in Austrian, in German, she is called stellvertretende Landeshauptfrau, and that sounds a little bit ridiculous. So governor, the deputy governor is quite better. It's wonderful to have you here, Ingrid, too. Just 1-2 short questions before we open to the audience. You came to the point that we have these alienations of class, which have material economic reasons, and you talked a lot about them. But you mentioned already, it's not only economics alone and the social and inequality alone. There's also something like cultural alienation, that these people from these different social milieus don't even say, not only say, we have this and these problems, these economic problems, they also say, and these elites, they don't even are interested in that. And I think that is also an answer to this chance, because for sure we don't have in Austria this kind of inequality and change and rising of inequality like in the US and other world, but we have a lot of people who feel that way, that they have problems and and they don't have even somebody who is interested, who talks for them. And do you think that's an important question, because some people say, okay, we have only to redistribute chances and life chances and income, and then every problem will go. Do you think that we can tackle this cultural alienation with economic policy alone?
Yeah, it's a very important and hard question, and there are many kinds of alienation. I will tell you, in my own experience, personal life, and also university life, the elites, not only did the working class fall down, but the elites were happy to lift away. And so I found in my own life in 2 major U.S. universities that basically the economics department over time became the feeding ground for Wall Street, very happily. And the amount of concern for the broader society, whether international, really was pretty low. And so that's considered to be the left part of American society. So I think that there really was a loss of public spirit and a loss of the Aristotelian, what I consider the Aristotelian sense of government as being the collective expression for the common good. And that was even taken very scientifically, of course, to be utterly naive, because the public choice school of politics pervaded academia. Public choice school says, well, the politicians are just in it for themselves. And that certainly can be true, but it is more likely to be an outcome if you believe that that's the only way politics can be. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Whereas my view is that politics can be good or it can be bad, but we have to choose and understand that the choice of cynicism is a disaster for society, a complete disaster. And so I do feel that this is a cultural phenomenon of the elites moving away. I could not stand Hillary Clinton, for example. I know her. I know the Clintons. I don't like them. And I voted for her, but with a trembling hand. Because, why? Because it's like Tony Blair also, which for me is a kind of denial of responsibility and playing a game. And wouldn't it be great if the Labor Party or the Democratic Party could be friends with all the rich people? Wouldn't that be swell? We'd be financed, we'd have great jobs, we'd be able to do all these things. And so this is quite dispiriting when you have a right party and you have a center-right party, and that's the full story of the politics. And that is part of this cultural phenomenon that somebody can really believe. Who's looking after me? I hope your politics isn't like that, but our politics is like that because it's completely money-driven, it's lobbying-driven, and it's cynically driven in most part. That's why when Bernie Sanders ran for office, he touched a nerve that was completely unexpected, by me too, by the way. My kids loved him from the first moment. I loved him for who he is, but I said, come on, no chance. Are you kidding? And of course, he touched a nerve that was quite wonderful because this is missing in the politics. And Hillary didn't excite for objective reasons. Objective reasons, because it was understood. By the way, but we learned a great experiment. The whole time Donald Trump attacked her. If you get in, you're just going to hire Goldman Sachs. And by the way, that's a different Sachs. I want to clarify that all the time. Haven't found the link. I'd be happy to find the link for a certain purpose. It could fund an NGO or something. But that was the attack. Then he comes in, and of course, the head of his economic team, the Secretary of Treasury, the finance minister, the Deputy Secretary of Treasury, the head of the White House Economic Advisors, who was the former president of Goldman Sachs, the Deputy National Security Advisor, the head of the nominated head of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, all from Goldman Sachs. It's the only company that runs our entire economic team. It should just have been completely subleased to them. They wouldn't have had to change offices. So that's the interesting joke of American politics. Goldman Sachs has been the only constant of American politics for 2 decades, because Hank Paulson was the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and he was the Treasury Secretary of actually start back with Bill Clinton. We had, what's his name, Robert Rubin. He was the CEO of Goldman Sachs and became the finance minister. Then Goldman Sachs provided the next finance minister in the next administration, Hank Paulson. Then when Obama got in, the whole economic team came from Goldman Sachs, by the way. Then when Trump gets in, not only the economic team, even the foreign policy team. That's why people feel alienated. That's really politics was given away. And I think it's a very real phenomenon.
One last question, I just say it because then you have to think about your questions now. You mentioned Bernie Sanders and this, how he touched. Some people say Bernie would have won. Others say no, he wouldn't have won in a general election. How would you see it?
Of course, I think he would have won. If it had been the two of them, he's a wonderful person, by the way. Really, really thoroughly decent. You should invite him to give a talk here.
Oh, can you arrange it?
I will. I can't
arrange it,
but I can mention it. I can recommend it. But it actually would have been close, and I think the substantive point is that the American voters are hurting. They're unhappy. They're normal people. They would actually like normal solutions. They're much better than our political class. And on most issues, objectively, in the opinion surveys, they are on the left, I would say, or what is the left in America, kind of would be center here. They want health provision. They want the U.S. to invest in renewable energy, not in fossil fuels. They want privacy. They don't want these wars. They want the rich to pay more in taxes. On issue after issue, the American people are okay. Not a little weird, but nothing exceptional, actually. It's our politics that is exceptional. And there's been a very good book written and good studies by a political scientist named Martin Gillens, who is now at Columbia and was at Princeton. And a book that I recommend is called Affluence and Influence. And what he did was to study public policy in the U.S. ranked by the survey preferences by class. So he would take surveys and divide them by the income of the survey respondent and classify the attitudes according to 10 deciles. And then looked at the outcome of the policy and asked which part of the income distribution determined the outcome. In the pure theory of democracy, democratic voting, it's supposed to be the median voter that determines, the one somewhere in the middle of the income distribution. But in America, according to this very fine work, the only decile of the income distribution that matters in attitude is the top decile. So the attitudes of the bottom 9 of the 10 deciles have no discernible effect on any outcome in our politics. And that's because the top decile pays all the bills for these politicians. We corrupted the system by making a market-based democratic system where you're both forced and encouraged at the top to buy as much of the political class as you can. It's a horrible blunder. It's a very good question how you ever get out of it. But the point for Bernie was the interesting point, actually, now that I say that, there are 2 lessons of that. One is, from an attitudinal point of view, a candidate like Bernie Sanders, who would be a mainstream social democrat here, can easily get a backing of a majority of the voters. It's not that he's so far out that they would never support him. The problem is fighting the kind of system we have, which obviously he had a hard time doing anyway. But the big question in our politics right now is, can someone win without large financial backing? Or could we have the invention one more time of a wonderfully decent patrician politician? We had very rich politicians who were progressive, the 2 Roosevelts and Kennedy. That's our way of doing it, which is elect a rich but thoughtful, progressive politician. I'm kind of interested in whether it's possible to have someone not rich still win an election without a billionaire backing them. And no, Obama had huge, big money behind him. He also had small money behind him. But but this is a very important point. Half his campaign finance came from very big money. And I don't know where my wife is here, but there she is. We often talk about a wonderful documentary that we saw of Gore Vidal. It was a biography of Gore Vidal. And it was just about the end of his life. There was a film crew with him the night that Obama won the election. And Vidal is sitting watching the television. I can tell you that moment we were dancing. We were with Ted Sorensen, JFK's speechwriter, actually, that night, and Ted and Gillian Sorensen, and we were crying and celebrating that Obama won the election in 2008. And then they show Gore Vidal, completely unmoved. They say, Mr. Vidal, Obama just won, aren't you thrilled? And he says, by the time you get to be president, you have sold out so many times it doesn't make a difference.
But Gore Vidal is mentally an Austrian, a permanent unhappy person.
Yeah, no, but the point is, which was true, his whole economic team was conservative. That's the reality. That's why he couldn't make the kind of breakthrough that he wanted. It came from the Robert Rubin, literally the Robert Rubin group, which I know them all. I was their colleagues. I wouldn't recommend it.
Thank you very much. Now it's your turn, but yeah. Connor, fang du an? Yeah.
I don't want to disappoint you about European societies, but in our welfare states, the main remedy we use to work against these tendencies is social welfare, transfer payment by the public to the poor people. And they don't seem to work because frustration is rising as well. Populism on the right is rising, trust in democracy is falling. So what could be the new version of social democracy and public matters to compete with these tendencies?
Maybe we'll take a few.
Yeah, we take a few
questions. Yeah.
Maybe. Also, ganz hinten war die erste Wortmeldung. Das sind allerdings jetzt mittlerweile 3. Bitte nochmal, es waren zu viele, sich das zu merken. Ja? Okay.
What's your view on the austerity policies that were implemented in Europe?
Also with regard to the challenges of the social democracy, social democracies got great in Europe or in Austria as well during the time of golden ages of capitalism where huge growth rates were there and the conditions were quite good. So how would you suit this kind of political design within the challenges of our time, embellishing just market conditions by social spending, and also your views to political designs and referring to examples that you wrote? I felt it was also quite of a Western-centered view and also providing kind of solutions and ideas to non-Western countries and cultures. Would you, which lens would you kind of look there and offer them also political designs associated to social democratic ones?
Das sind so wahnsinnig viele, das schaffen wir gar nicht. Das wird heute ein bisschen undemokratisch, tut mir leid.
Yeah, thank you very much for your talk. It was very interesting. So you've talked a lot about the deeply enshrined nepotism and corruption in the US and also in Europe. And so my question is, how and in which direction can we change the discourse to kind of change this, to enable transparency and change the patron-client relationships?
Dame hier links, da genau, also links beim Mittelgang. Okay.
Thank you for your talk. I would like to tackle the question of education. In Austria, education is for free. Everyone has the chance to get a higher education, even to go to university, no matter what social background you have or what economic stability. And the second issue is that I agree to lowering the population growth rates through education of girls in Africa, but for Europe, what is the solution for Europe? Education, we have education, but it doesn't seem to provide a solution against populism.
Überhaupt der erste war der Herr ganz hinten vor dem Bild, genau.
Yeah, thank you for your great talk. I have two questions. I'm a proponent of an unconditional basic income. What's your opinion about that? Second question, I'm also a philosopher, and even philosophy, which is supposed to be the least fragmented of all sciences, is terribly fragmented. And in my opinion, economic theory also is quite fragmented. So what are the biggest omissions there in your opinion, like lack of monetary theory or lack of evolutionary theory? There's a thing called economics, for instance, evolutionary economics. Maybe you've heard about that.
Great. Maybe I'll.
Maybe we make it.
It's a long list, but all interconnected. Let me start out with a couple of basic economic points that I think are important. First, our societies are incredibly productive. Our technologies are incredibly effective. In the United States, for example, time use studies, when you survey how people use their time, the average amount of work per day for Americans 16 and older is 3 hours, 10 minutes. And on that basis, we produce $60,000 for every American per year. What does it mean, 3 hours, 10 minutes? What it means is for people who are at work on a given day, they work about 7 hours or 7.5 hours, but only about 40% of the population above the age of 16 is at work on any given day. Why? Well, a lot of students or people not in the workforce. This is at a low unemployment time. This is not because of mass unemployment. Or people retired, or people on vacation, and so on. This is an incredible phenomenon. It's something completely new for humanity, that we can live the way we do. The only food insecurity for someone in my class is which restaurant is it going to be? You don't worry about being hungry. You don't worry about where's your meal going to come from. You have many anxieties about the world, but from an economic point of view, all of the things that people worried about for the first 150,000 years of our species, we don't worry about at all. Only which coffee shop are we going to meet in? And this is a success story, so we should understand this. This has enabled people now to live an average of 80 years, to be free from most communicable disease, to have absolute food security, to enjoy every wonder of life. If you're lucky in the right part of the income distribution. That's not the top 1%, by the way. That's for a lot of people. So the backdrop for us is not deep crisis. We're not in a deep crisis. We're actually in a kind of golden age, but with tension and change. The tensions have to do with the fact that we are very bad at taking care of ourselves. We create trouble for ourselves. We don't sit back and say, and by the way, I'll tell you the same numbers for the world. The world economy is $127 trillion output this year for 7.5 billion people, which is about $17,000 on average per person. It used to be 200 years ago about $500 on average per person. There is no general economic crisis, period. We've got, I'm sorry?
People in Greece will defer with you.
No, I'm coming to that. What I'm saying is we have absolutely no shortage of capacity for everybody to live a good life. None. And we shouldn't think about the profundity of our crisis. We should think about the weirdness of exactly this question, that with all of this productivity, why aren't we solving problems? That's a very different matter. If I come to Greece, the Greek problem could have been solved a long time ago. In fact, the solution for Greece is completely obvious, and that is that Greece's debt should have been canceled substantially about 6 years ago. And I worked with Mr. Papandreou on that, and I worked with Mr. Tsipras on that. And Mr. Schäuble has said no, period. That's not an economic problem. Of course, it turns into one for Greece. That is a political problem. And Germany, of all countries in the world, should understand this, because Germany got the biggest damn debt relief ever after making the biggest crime of history ever. And in 1953, got its debts written off in the London debt agreement. And I once went to the Library of Congress to get a copy of that to give to Chancellor Kohl when I was pleading for debt cancellation for Poland. And he looked at it and he said, you know, that's a good argument. And Poland got debt cancellation. And so Greece's problems are not very complicated, except German politics right now, which is inappropriate. And that's true of so many of our problems. We are letting basic, obvious facts get away from us. And this is a age-old problem, but it's, for us, we should understand that we are at an economic miracle in terms of our capacity to do things. Now, where is that miracle going to go? Technology is actually advancing very fast right now if we don't blow ourselves up. So our capacity to do better and more is going to improve. The things that the scientists are coming up with are just unbelievable. We've already had a billion-fold improvement of computational storage, transmission, and computing operations. And we still have several more doublings to go in Moore's Law. And we have real prospects of quantum computing. And we figured out, we as a glorious we as a species, but some very clever people figured out how to beat all the Go champions of the world with a smart computer last year. And that is a sign of incredible advances of machine learning, which mean, as I told you earlier, my job is going to be obsolete very fast. And that's good. Now, what does it mean for us economically if you look into the future? It means the capacity to solve more problems. It means, if we take it, the capacity to have more leisure, which has been part of our tremendous advance over the past century. Leisure wasn't even a concept 100 years ago, except if you were an aristocrat. Most people couldn't imagine a day of their life without work because they dropped dead before they would ever retire. And so now this is completely different. And that's a wonderful thing. And I can tell you, by the way, since I work in the poorest countries of the world, the big difference in the poorest countries from the richest countries is that poor people work all the time, from morning till night, in physical, hard work. That's what poverty really means. That's why they don't want it, because it's literally backbreaking. It's exhausting. Women are out in the fields from the earliest moments of the day. They're carrying wood, they're carrying heavy jerry cans of water, they're weeding all day, they come home, they're cooking. It's endless physical labor. We have none of that. I don't know if anyone here works physical work. I don't break a sweat unless my wife successfully convinces me to go on a bicycle in the gym. Otherwise, there's not a moment of my life that would cause me to break a sweat. What kind of change of life is that? It's unbelievable. And my observation to you is people don't like physical labor. So everyone would like to live the way we do compared to the way they're living right now, which is why the desire for development is so strong. It's not all baubles and useless things. It's a kind of security and ease of life that people crave. So, okay, what do I think that means for the future? More technological change gives us the possibility for even more prosperity, longer lives, more leisure time, more chance to be endless students or creative or artists or other things, more chance to end poverty, to share all of this. But there are several huge obstacles to that. One is that the natural tendency might be that Larry Page owns everything in the end. You know, it could be that the way that markets handle these technological advances is that Google and Amazon and Facebook and all the rest have captured all of it. A second possibility is that our governments end up being truly the complete big brothers of Orwell because they can know everything about us at every moment, and so we lose our freedom and we're destroyed by these technologies. That's a very real possibility also, because nothing with technology, no matter how good, is only good. It all has to be decided how it should be managed. So I believe in the sharing part of this story. That's the social democratic part of this story, that this is for the common good, and that you don't take the market settlement as the end of the story. You take it as the base on which you then decide how these resources in society are going to be allocated. And what I see economically is the chance for better lives, longer lives, healthier lives, if we choose to do it. And globally, we're a little bit paralyzed right now, because if you're just afraid of the outside world, you lack, of course, the will and the imagination to cooperate with other countries. And we need a kind of social democracy on a global scale, not just on a national scale. We need to be able to make sure that every part of the world can meet basic needs, and it's not a heavy lift. And we face another big problem, which I didn't talk about at all, and that is we have a massive environmental crisis, And we need to be devoting at least a couple percent of our national income to the environmental crisis each year so that we change the energy system and get off the global warming and make these adjustments. It's not too expensive, but it's not free. And so we absolutely have to decide that we're going to do that as well. So this is all, I think, the question of our governance, both of our own selves, our tastes, and our collective action. And those are ancient problems, and every society continues to have to learn how to cooperate, how to share internally, and how to manage for the future. We're very bad at all of that right now. We're not looking ahead. We don't cooperate well, and it's getting worse. And the divides between rich and poor are widening. This universal basic income question, to my mind, is basically social democracy. It exists. It exists in Norway or Sweden or Denmark, and to an extent in Austria as well. And so there's a technical question whether you do it as a cash payment or you do it as universal education, universal health care, and so forth. I'm more for the latter way than just handing a check, because I think it leads to a better society and proper mutual responsibility more likely. You asked me a question about, one question about non-Western societies. My experience is that you can think about three different kinds of social phenomena for a moment. One is the technological base of the society. The second is the economic organization of the society. And the third is the political organization of the society. In my 40 years of doing economic work, I would say that the technological convergence is the fastest in general, in the sense that anywhere you go these days, someone's got a smartphone, and they're basically, of course, they're generating electricity the same way, and they may have very different levels of income, but the underlying technology, and there are lags of diffusion, but technologies converge. That's the first point. Second is economies converge, but much more gradually for a lot of political economy reasons and a lot of technical reasons. Economic convergence comes more slowly, and economic institutions can remain distinct, but not that distinct. If you take the best performing 40 countries in the world on an economic scale, the institutions of them would look pretty similar, actually. And most of them would have almost a similar genealogy of company law, maybe Roman code, maybe Napoleonic code. There would be different legal histories, but it wouldn't look so different among those 40. If you go to politics, though, the persistence of political models, I find, is millennia long, not even decadal. So China really looks a lot like the Han Empire, because the Han Empire was a centralized administrative state. 2,000 years ago, China has a centralized administrative state, of course, in completely different technical conditions, and now much more urban and with somewhat more decentralization, but not so much. So a Han emperor would find modern Chinese technology completely ununderstandable, the economy ununderstandable, but the Chinese Communist Party, pretty clear. And I don't think that Peter the Great or the Romanovs would have such a confusion about Putin. I don't. And Andrew Jackson would find a soulmate in Donald Trump. And so the political culture is really persistent. And I'm very wary of well, I'm very allergic to American politics, which is accept our political system or we bomb you, which is a very ineffective foreign policy. And I'm not too keen on political conditionality in general. So I also have observed China's done extremely well economically over the last 35 years, maybe the best economic performance in history, under a completely different political context. And there's many technical things to say about that political context, because they were catching up, and a strong one-party state had advantages of catching up in certain ways. So some of the specific institutions facilitated rapid catching up and might be needing a big change in the future. But the idea that there's one tight connection between politics and economics is just wrong. And politics and economic performance. And Hayek was wrong on multiple counts. You know, and Friedman was wrong on multiple counts. So Hayek said, if you keep a strong state, you go to serfdom. This has now been tested over a period of 72 years since he wrote that book, and it's wrong. It's just wrong. And the second thing Friedman said is that capitalism and freedom go together, and that's empirically wrong also. And so I think we just need to keep these delineations a little bit more clear and understand why you can have this multiple weaving. What I would not recommend to a country anywhere, though, is what the Soviet Union tried. Aside from its politics, it said, we're going to invent all our own technology. We're a new, different system, we're outside, we're going to invent everything. That's why the Soviet system, aside from its cruelty, completely failed economically, which was that it was not integrated economically into global technological advance. And by the time that transistors and modern computation came, other than in the military sphere, the Soviet Union fell hopelessly behind. And that was basically the underlying reason for the collapse, was that it couldn't keep up with technology. China's wisdom is that it's 100% integrated into global technological systems, and it's going to start leading a lot of them actually now, because it's not trying to do it closed behind a barrier, it's trying to do it as part of an open system. And this is a very, very different phenomenon from the Soviet approach. So, final question from my reflection, and it relates to this question of economics. What's wrong with economics? In my view, and I gave lectures about this at London School of Economics in February, and I'll publish a book about it shortly. Economics fails mainly because it doesn't have any clear goals. And so it gave up on the idea of human well-being as really the objective. It's just what the market does, that's what we study, that's what we promote, and that's what we measure. But it's unserious from the point of view of economic well-being. And if it took what I call Aristotelian economics, which is that the purpose of economics is to improve human well-being, you would reorient the field very considerably, both in its underlying assumptions and in the way that it operates. And it would create a tremendous more space for shared objectives and for public goods and for public action. And I think the failure to have clear goals is extraordinarily defeating for economics as a field. And it's kind of infected many of the ways that we look at these issues. If the field said the purpose of economics is human well-being, first of all, economists would spend a little bit of time asking what produces human well-being. And that turns out to be a fascinating question, on which many wise people, from Confucius and Aristotle to Jesus to Daniel Kahneman, have made many pithy observations. But our field doesn't have any of those considerations in it. We just have a utility function. That's the least answer. That's completely the wrong starting point. Because, okay, I won't go on. So we don't ask the right questions, and therefore we don't get the right answers. But fundamentally for me, given all this wonderful technology, the biggest challenge, in my view, is living together decently. And that requires values. And that requires a shared understanding of what the good is and why we're doing these things. And any person who can stand up and say, America first, do you hear me, America first, is automatically disqualified, in my mind, from being part of this collective enterprise of finding well-being. Because that is disgusting as a starting point. It's got to be wrong. And we need to find a way to be able to look at that and say, that is so outrageous. Go away. And we don't have that in our society right now. We don't distinguish between what's decent and what's not decent very clearly. And we also, just the last point, we are, we're not an easy species. And the latest, I think the best thinking of evolutionary psychology is that we evolved on two-level selection, which forced us to learn to be decent within our in-group and to dislike the out-group. And that two-level selection is why we have a dual human nature, which I think we do. Incredible capacity to love and incredible capacity to kill. And that, I think, is the best theory of human nature that's come along. And Darwin had it, and now it's been elaborated. And I think that there's a tremendous merit in it. And what it says to me is we have bad instincts. A lot of people say we're nasty, but our human nature is to be kind. No. I don't think that's quite right. It's also not true that our human nature is to be nasty. It's more complicated. But it is probably true that our human nature is to be nasty to those who we are primed to think of as being others. That's probably pretty deep and has to be learned so it can be unlearned. In other words, we have to learn that we're prejudiced, we're biased, we're subject to deep cognitive limitations. And I think, by the way, some of the classy teachings of Jesus were really smart on this. Because not only about learning to love the other and all of that stuff, which is good, but the idea that before you complain about the mote in the other person's eye, take out the beam in your own eye. At least that's how we say it in English. And that's, he was teaching confirmation bias to his disciples, which is that you're going to think you're right, whereas you're not understanding how biased your cognitive approach is. And this is really what we need to be inculcating, I think, in society, which is we have a dark side to us. We need to keep it under control. We need to learn that it's a dark side. We also have a wonderful side. If we could play the game that we are challenged by outer space aliens so that we could all unite as humanity, we would probably do just fine. We'd all get together, no problem. Oh, isn't it fun to be working with you and I don't even speak your language? Please come into my house. How are we going to fight those aliens? We would do well as humanity in that if we faced the cataclysm coming from Alpha Centauri instead of from the Middle East. And that's what we need to figure out how to
develop, cultivate, and solve.
We know that there are a lot of more questions. We know that, and that we could sit here till midnight. But we know also from experience that now the people will leave because we are in the outskirts, and it takes some time to come back to the inner city. So the best thing is now to stop that, to say thank you to you, to apologize to everybody who couldn't ask, to say thank you to Jeffrey Sachs that he was here, and we were very glad, and this was a wonderful evening, and we hope to see you again in the Bruno Kreisky Forum. Thank you, Jeffrey Sachs.